Okay, so we're going to continue with our funky portraits inspired by the graffiti artist Phetus. So you should have just the basic shapes mapped out and features of your portrait that you did. If you have any teeth or anywhere where you really have to get some black and fine details in a spot, I would suggest using a Sharpie marker to fill that in, because when you go in with oil pastels, it's going to be really difficult to get in any small area or shapes. Same thing goes to anything else on your face. If for some reason you think your shapes are too small, you can use a Sharpie marker to fill it in, colored or black, and then move on to oil pastels. So we want to be thinking about the color wheel when you're making this, and you should be choosing analogous colors to blend. Now again, analogous colors are colors that are next to one another on the color wheel. So make sure that you're looking at the color wheel and you're picking a color that's next to the first color you choose. So for example, I want to find a shape, and this is why I told you to do big shapes on your portrait, where I'm going to start to add some color. Okay, if you don't have a shape in your portrait, you need to make one. So for example, maybe if I wanted to make another shape in mine, I could go ahead and make a shape for my eyebrows. Okay, so I already had shapes in my eyes, so I could have left it, but I just wanted to show you in case you need to add some. So you're going to start with your first color first, and this is kind of like a red-orange. I think it looks more red to me. And I'm going to pick the shape I want to use it with and fill that shape halfway with it. So I like to outline the areas first where I plan on using the color. And then I go in and I kind of fill it in. As you notice, I have a placemat down. This is so that I don't get any smudges of oil pastel on the table. And notice too how my hand is upwards as I'm using that oil pastel. If I keep it downwards like this, I'm gonna end up smudging it. All right, so I filled in about half of that shape, okay? You wanna make sure you only fill in half of whatever shape you're using. I'm gonna look at the color wheel and see what's next to red. If I look at red, I can either do purple or I can do orange. So I have to choose between those two. So it looks like I'm probably gonna stick with, let's see, that orange is really similar to the color I just used, so it might not pop out enough. So maybe I'm gonna do this purple. So now what I wanna do with the purple is kind of outline those shapes with that color now. I'm gonna start on the outer edge. And when I start to get towards that red, I'm gonna go back and forth and kind of towards the middle in between the red and the purple. I'm just gonna do little circular motions to help blend those two colors together. Okay, and I wanna be careful not to smudge them. So now you see, I went in a little bit with that purple into some of the red, and I've got a nice blend. So I'm gonna walk you through that again. So maybe on this side, I wanna do the opposite color. I'm gonna do a cool. So I'm going to use some green, and I'm just going to peel this a little bit. And I'm going to just outline that area that I'm using with green first. Not the whole thing, because that part is not going to be green. I'm going to go in and color this. And I want to push kind of hard on this so I get nice, vibrant, opaque colors. Okay, so now I have to look at the color wheel. What's next to green? Well, I see on one side is yellow and on the other side is blue. So I think I'm gonna go in and maybe do, let's see, a blue. Let's see if I can find one. There's one. I just have to slightly peel this. Now I'm gonna outline. Color it in. I'm not quite mixing yet. I just want to mix in that middle. So I'm going to take this now. I'm going to start to do my little circles. And just towards the middle, because I still want some green areas of the original color. So just in the middle, I'm just going to lightly push on this and do little circles. So now I'm going to go in, and any other shapes I have in here, I'm going to blend. Now, if you have a shape that's really tiny, I really don't think you're going to be able to blend in it. you can just go in and kind of fill it in with one color. So like here, I know this is going to be small areas, so I'm just filling it in with one color. And I'm being careful not to get my edge of my hand near that oil pastel because you cannot fix it if you smudge it. Okay. And as you can see, sometimes when you use these, they have little pieces of other color stuck to them. So if you want to get scrap paper and just test the color out first before you use it to avoid that from happening, you're more than welcome to do that. Okay, so now I've got my shapes all colored in. Now I want to think about designs and lines I want to add to this. I'm going to keep it real simple, do lines, and maybe, I think I'm going to keep it at lines because it's very hard to draw shapes with an oil pastel. So what I'm going to do is I want to make sure that whatever I do on one side, I do the same thing as the other side to keep it balanced, and that's called symmetry. So obviously you might have some different shapes going on each side. So just kind of do your best. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but just try to do your best to balance it. Okay, so I have some really cool lines in there. And I'm feeling really good about the blending I have going on. So now what I'm gonna do is go on to some watercolor. So what's cool about watercolor and oil pastels is when you go over oil with water, it doesn't mix. The two don't mix together. So I can go right on top of any area that
Group 2 for dismissal, Group 2 for dismissal.
Has oil pastel, and it's okay. I don't have to go carefully around the lines. Now, if you have an area you want to keep white, like the teeth, then you want to make sure that you avoid coloring that in with paint. So I'm going to take a watercolor brush, and watercolor brushes have these nice gentle bristles, and they're kind of darker. You don't want to push too hard on them because it hurts the bristles on the brush and it ruins them. Some of you have some nice watercolor paper. However, we kind of ran out of watercolor paper. So some of you just have this nice heavy thick paper. What that means is you can't stay in one spot and go over and over and over because you're going to rip the paper. So I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to take my watercolors. And again, I want to think about analogous colors, colors that are next to one another on the color wheel. So I'm going to think about what are the two colors that I want my overall piece to be. This feels really kind of a mixture of cool and warm, so I could probably really do anything. I'm going to use a darker color in mine so that you can see the contrast and how that looks. So I'm going to start with a blue, and you'll notice on your palette that your analogous colors are already placed next to each other. So after I've done my blue, I can either do green or purple. So I'm going to start, and I have a nice wash first, so this means I have more water to my brush than I do paint. The more paint I have on my brush and the less water, the darker my paint's going to be. So if I'm adding very little water to my brush, that paint is going to be really dark. Now if I start to hear it really scratchy like that, that means I have to add more paint to my brush and to my palette. It's too dry. Now if I want to lighten that area up, I can just add water on its own and spread it out while that watercolor's still dry. But as you see, I'm literally going right on top of these oil pastels and it's not doing anything. So you don't have to be really careful with painting around these. Now in some areas, before this blue dries, I really want to mix my analogous because watercolor tends to dry really fast. So I'm going to take my brush, water down my green that I decided to use, and I'm going to now kind of blend some of that green into my blue and get some really nice blends, just like the artists we looked at. And again, same thing. The less water I have, the darker my color is going to be. The more water I have, the lighter it's going to be. So I'm going to go back and forth between those two analogous colors and fill up my paper. Okay, so there you have it. I've gone around my edges. I don't see any white spots. I've got some nice blendings. Naturally, watercolor is going to dry a little bit lighter than it looks on your paper, so it might look a little lighter next time. I didn't stay in any area. You can already see some of that paper started to pick up. And if I kept going, when I noticed those little pieces of paper picking up, if I kept staying in that area, eventually it's going to rip my paper. So you have to move around and you have to really work quick with a watercolor because it dries fast. Another thing I forgot to mention while you're doing this, if you're using your palette and you don't clean your brush off between colors with a little bit of water, you're going to mix all your colors up. So be careful that you don't do that, and also try not to splatter it like I did. Okay, so those are all the steps. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.